I'm Hector Armienta. I'm a composer and the artistic director of Opera Cultura, and I'm joined by John de los Santos, who is known as a choreographer. He's known as a librettist and also as a renowned stage director. So welcome, John. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
No, I'm absolutely thrilled that we're doing this together. You know, I've been watching your career for some time, and you're doing some great work. And I know that you're doing something recently. It's coming out. It's called the Christmas Spider. It's a holiday show in December. It's
Mhm.
going to be premiered at Opera Louisiana. And then also you're working on a project that we can't yet give too much information about, but you're working with a wonderful colleague and friend of mine, composer Jorge Sosa, on a new piece, and hopefully there'll be an announcement very soon that we can share with everyone.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yes.
All right, so why don't we, we can sort of think of this differently or talk about this differently because you are an artist that wears many hats. Why don't we talk about your work first as a librettist? So talk
Yeah.
about
So,
how you got involved I mean, why did you start writing libretto?
libretti writing came from my frustration about a little over 10 years ago of wanting to be involved in new work. We live in a time where American opera is going through a resurgence, and there's lots of new premieres happening in various cities and lots of exciting things. And I always felt like, I can't seem to get into that. I was always hired to direct and choreograph a lot of revivals, and it was a very sort of niche of people who could actually stage them. And so I thought, well, you know what? I'll just start writing my own. And eventually, through the process of doing that and meeting more composers, people did start contacting me about directing pieces since I had experience with that. So it really came out of necessity of wanting to create my own opportunity.
You did a really interesting project. I think it was called the Copper Queen. Is that right? And
That's
remind
correct.
me, who was the composer on that project?
The composer of that was Clint Borzoni, who I have. Christmas Spider is our third project together, and Copper Queen was our second. But yes, that was a piece that we wrote. We won the Arizona Opera Spark initiative with that, and it's a well, it's an opera expanded upon an actual haunted hotel in Arizona that he and I have stayed at. And it was supposed to premiere during COVID, which obviously didn't happen. And so instead, they made a feature film of the opera that was award winning and really well received. And then it went on to be staged by me a year later. Yeah, so it was a really, really great
Yeah,
piece.
it's very interesting that it went from, the idea of being a stage piece
Mhm.
to actually being a film. And did you direct that film or
I
did
didn't
they have
direct the
someone else do
film.
it?
Yeah, Crystal Manich, who I don't know if you probably know her also. She directed the film. I wrote the screenplay, and because there were so many other things that needed doing, because we did it very quickly, we just had to kind of all band together to make that happen. But then I did end up directing the stage premiere of Copper Queen in 2021, I believe. After that,
Okay. So you wrote the libretto and then you had to adapt it for stage. I mean for film.
hmm for film, yeah.
Yeah, and I haven't seen it. So is it a you say you wrote the screenplay, so is it not sung or
It's sung, but I mean, the thing is that, the libretto has limited stage directions where it'll say, this character exits stage right through the door. Whereas in the screenplay, it has to be much more specific about, the directions where the camera might be moving and how the whole thing is going to work. So there are less liberties that can be, there's ambiguity, I guess, in a stage libretto than there would be for a screenplay.
okay. And then as a stage director, uh I'm assuming then that your writing, libretto writing, is somewhat informed by your work as a stage director. So you want to talk a little bit about
Absolutely.
that? Like
Yeah, for sure.
let me go back to what, for those who just write the libretto, right?
Mhm.
What is sort of the added benefit that you're a stage director that also writes libretti?
Well, if because I do both, I know it'll be done right. It's like, whenever
Okay.
whenever I teach libretto writing or talk about it, many people discuss how can you make a libretto director proof, which I was a director way before I was a librettist. So obviously I don't have anything against directors, but sometimes, the composer and librettist will have a specific idea in mind that then will be reinterpreted or sometimes even intentionally ignored by the director and their team. And so this is a way in which I can assure that what the composer and I are envisioning is a part of at least the premiere. I mean, I always hope that my pieces will go on to be staged by other folks once there's been an established premiere that's happened to set a precedent. But, there are ways where if a character really needs to be wearing a blue dress, you can have another character say, "Oh, what a lovely dress you have, the color of the sky on a clear day." And then boom, it's there. Whereas if you just say in stage directions, "Should be wearing a blue dress," the director may say, "I don't like blue. It'll be green instead."
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And what's interesting also, I'll share with everyone here is that you're going to be directing the premiere of a new work that I'm creating called Farolitos, which is based on the book by Rodolfo Naya. And I was working on synopsis, and you provided some really, sort of important information for me in terms of what might work better, for the work. But I know that, I shouldn't say I know that, but I know when I do write, I try to visualize, because I also write the libretti, right? I try to
mhm.
visualize what it's going to look like on stage. But sometimes composers, there's a lot of it's just sort of a very kind of cerebral mental experience. And there are certain things like how much time does it take for a singer to go on and off stage? And making sure that there's room in the music for drama where the text is
Mhm.
not as important. So you want to sort of elaborate a little bit on that from the perspective of a stage director and a librettist? Like what are sort of
Yeah,
maybe the top 3 or 4 things that someone should really think about when they're creating a new work or staging a new work?
if the writers are alive, engage with them. There are some directors who don't want any input from the writers, but I think that is very detrimental to the piece. I think that you have to engage with them and discuss not only what needs to happen in the staging, but also what was the genesis of the piece? Why are they writing it? What sparked an interest in the topic? Um, I think that sometimes, we're all very creative people, we're all very passionate people, but I think there always has to be a very clear line of communication and a consensus over what is the piece meant to convey and what do we want the audience to take away from this experience. On the other hand, too, there are several problems that I can't solve. And so I always want to engage with the designers, the composer, the conductor, with ways in which they would solve something, because sometimes their idea is much better than anything I could ever come up with. So at the end, it's all about the good of the piece and how can we come together to realize the story we're trying to tell.
Mhm. Uh, 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 yeah, very helpful, very helpful. I want to ask you a question regarding more related to being a Latinx artist. And can you tell me a little bit about your cultural background?
Yes, I've come from South Texas, this little tiny town called Bulverde, which is outside of San Antonio, and I grew up in the hill country of Texas. My mother's side is, I believe, 90. We did a ancestry 98% Welsh, and then my dad's side, growing up, we just said, oh, they're both uh, grandma and grandpa are Mexican, but there was never more of a exploration than that. But then, as you get older, you start to do more family history and all of that, and find that my grandmother's family was primarily from southern Spain, and then my grandfather's side was from Chihuahua. So as I got older, I started to explore that side of it more. Grew up in a mostly English speaking household, but at my grandmother's house, I was always around Spanish. But ironically, they didn't want to speak it around us. They said, well, you don't need to hear that. You need to hear English and always, hear that side of it. So primarily it was just through the food, to be honest, the cooking, and also just the really tight family units and the big reunions, and going to mass, things like that.
Yeah, yeah. Um, you know, um, yeah, there is such a different experience when you are born in the States than if you are from, Spanish-speaking country and then you immigrate to the U.S. It's
Right.
it's very different. Yeah. Now, your work isn't specifically necessarily always, I should say, about the Latinx cultural experience. You seem to have, you seem to explore a lot of different kinds of stories and
Yeah.
all of that. But the work that you are doing that is, Latinx related, because you're directing something for Opera Southwest, or you did, I can't remember now.
I did. I'm doing another one. Yeah, the first production I did for them was Frida, by Rodriguez, and which I'm doing that piece again in Orlando in January of next year. But it's interesting because in 2017, I think I was contacted about doing a new production of Piazzolla's Maria de Buenos Aires, which is an Argentine tango piece. And I asked, "Oh, well, I'm so glad that you thought of me. Why did you select me?" And they're like, "Well, isn't it obvious? Your last name." And it's like, well, but it's a
Somehow,
completely,
oh God, yeah. Somehow
culturally,
it's all the same,
completely,
right? Oh,
yeah.
it's
I
crazy.
won't name the company, but I remember right after COVID, there was a company that did Maria de Buenos Aires, and the logo for the production was a calavera. And I
Oh,
was like, that's not
yeah,
this. That would be like putting a Canadian maple leaf for, oh, an opera in America. It's so
yeah,
I feel like
yeah.
even
There's
though my work doesn't always specifically deal with the Latinx experience, I'm always interested in promoting artists from that background and exploring pieces. And because we don't have nearly enough pieces culturally from that culture in the opera canon that are mainstays. We have some of the mariachi operas and then Florencia, but we need more for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. Now you're directing, is it Before Night Falls for Opera Southwest? And
Yes.
that's from written by a Cuban composer.
Yes,
Uh,
that's
did he
Jorge Martin.
did he write the libretto also?
He wrote the libretto, yes, in collaboration with Dolores Ka, who was the English translator of a lot of Ronaldo Arenas's books.
Mhm.
The whole piece is it's a biography of the Cuban poet Ronaldo Arenas, and I'm directing it. But I was also, when I was a lot younger, the choreographer of the world premiere at Fort Worth.
Okay, so it is your culture, and you're not Cuban,
No.
but is any of your who you are as a Latino, as a Latinx person, do you think that's going to inform at all how you approach this piece, or is it not really? There's no connection for you as a stage director.
Um, I mean, I think that definitely, because I've been able to read, I mean, my Spanish is not the greatest, but it does enable me to read the piece in its original language, to have an understanding that is sometimes lost in the translation. And I always say that one of my biggest influences going into opera direction, even though I didn't know it at the time, was going to Catholic masses as a kid, which I never would have gone to were it not for my father's side. And we went to mass every Sunday, and I was always very taken by the ritual of mass. And I've been to masses in different languages, and so the pageantry of that, and then the interest of that, and also sitting with my grandmother and watching novelas growing up. I didn't realize it, but that definitely influenced my taste for drama and larger than life expressions. So I think that my pathway towards opera, both as a writer and director, was definitely influenced by that side of my upbringing.
Mhm. Well, my thoughts are, you know, there is this thread, this cultural thread that exists among all the different sort of Spanish-speaking cultures, though, so our roots are to some extent we're drawing from some of the same wells, right?
Mhm.
But there is a thing, there is about family, and to some extent, not always food. Um, but I think that does sort of exist or live within us. But I will say that, my experiences, for example, being, someone who's from California is very different from those who are, you from New Mexico or even Texas, even though we might be some of us might be more Spanish or more Mexican or whatever that is, but I would think that it would inform your work to some extent. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think might be some of the challenges for you as a Latinx creator and stage director? Or do you not sort of see yourself in that box?
I mean, I never saw myself in that box until I never really led with that. And I think part of the reason why is because I started this whole career as a choreographer because choreographing opera is a very niche kind of thing. And I was yanked right after I graduated my undergrad at Fort Worth, Texas Christian University. The opera company needed a choreographer, and they hired me based on a professor's recommendation, and it kind of snowballed. So I never really had to think about my identity in terms of applying for jobs. It was always, oh, he can choreograph and do fight choreography and dances, all these different kinds of dances. And I actually started doing 9 productions of Carmen. And I guess I'll tell you a quick story about that. So I first worked at Washington National Opera, which at the time was run by Placido Domingo. And before his staff met me, they were all emailing me things like, oh, Senor de los Santos, we can't wait to meet you. We're very excited for you to talk about your expertise in this field. And I show up and I'm like, hi, y'all, I'm from San Antonio. Like they just had this.
Yeah.
It's funny because as a kid, I was bullied a lot for my last name
Yeah.
because people couldn't pronounce it, didn't know what it meant. I was called Della Sandwich by kids growing up. And I used to hate it because it's 3 words and it's capitalized in strange ways and it's very long. But the irony is that once I got into this business, everybody was like, De Los Santos, what a beautiful opera name. Oh, I love that. So it's funny how those kinds of things happen, but I always want to be seen as, as an artist, not just a Latinx artist. And then definitely if someone wants to reach out because of that, it's fine, but I don't want to be defined and boxed in just by that, because I want people to experience and learn about all the cultures that make up this tapestry of theater.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, what's interesting also is, you're a lot, you're a lot younger than I am. And when I was growing up as an art, I didn't necessarily um, uh, desire to create work around the Latinx cultural experience, but I just felt that there was a need because our stories were not being told. But it's
Yeah.
wonderful to hear from, young people like you that you can explore different kinds of directions. It's really great. It's really great.
Yeah, and I embrace it. I mean, I've got a mural painting of La Virgen behind me. So, made up of these fabulous things. So, as I've gotten older, I've gotten much more into a lot of Mexican iconography and mythology and folklore, and those kinds of influences have definitely worked my way into what I write and that lens. So I really, really love it.
Like this piece you're developing with Jorge.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I had never seen. It's based. I can go and tell you. It's based. Inspired by is a better word. It's inspired by the 1960 film Macario, which was the first Mexican film nominated for an Oscar, and it is a heartbreakingly beautiful film. Absolutely gorgeous. And I met Jorge in 20. Oh God, maybe 2009, somewhere around there. And even though his experience in Texas was very different from mine, we were like, oh my God, we have to collaborate one of these days. And sure enough, here we are adapting beautiful, beloved piece.
Yeah, it takes time. It takes time.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, John, it's been a pleasure to have this conversation with you. As I said, I've been an admirer of your work. I'm looking forward to the work you're going to be doing with Farolitos. And yeah, you're just doing great. So you're definitely one of the movers and shakers. So yeah,
Got to wear a lot of hats, but thank you so much for having me. And I'm really excited about our collaborations also.
thank you. Well, thank you everyone for joining us on another episode of Los Revolucionarios. And I look forward to seeing you at the next one. Bye-bye.